Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Wyenberg. This time we will continue our reading of Henrietta Sees It Through by Joyce Dennis. September 23rd, 1942. My dear Robert, we have all been to our cathedral city to see Hamlet. One of the actors was a sort of cousin of Mrs. Whinebite, and as the seats weren't going too well, she rounded us up like a cattle rancher on the films and herded us, lowing mournfully, up to the station and into the train. "Is this journey really necessary?" said Mrs. Savernac, making a last bid for freedom. "Yes," said Mrs. Whinebite firmly, and closed the carriage door on us while she went to buy tickets. A good deal of the journey was spent in paying her back the money for our fares. Everybody borrowed change from everybody else, and even then it wouldn't come right until a kind clergyman in the corner offered 9 pennies and a 3-penny bit in return for a shilling. "Don't tell Mrs. Whinebite," said little Mrs. Simpkins in a low voice, "but I've forgotten what Hamlet is about." "It's about a young man called Hamlet," said Colonel Simpkins helpfully. "And a girl called Ophelia who goes mad," said the Admiral. "And a ghost," said Lady B. "And a queen called Gertrude who gets poisoned," said the conductor. "And a king called Claudius who gets stabbed," I said, "and a young man called Laertes who gets killed in a duel, and an old man called Polonius who gets killed by mistake." Little Mrs. Simpkins sighed. "I remember now," she said. "Not a bright piece. I think they ought to try and put on something bright in wartime, don't you? Robert, I am now middle-aged. Ever at my back I hear Time's winged chariot drawing near, and many of the careless raptures of youth leave me with an unquickened pulse. But still, Robert, still I get the same old thrill as the curtain goes up. Charles says he has seen me sit wrapped through a Poirot show on the beach, my hands damp with excitement, and though this isn't absolutely true, I do enjoy a play, and though Mrs. Whinebite would never suspect it, the plays of William Shakespeare are my favorites. And of his plays, the one I did at school and know well are the ones I like best of all." The house lights lowered, and Lady B, who shares my passion for the drama, squeezed my hand, and the curtain went up. At the end of the first act, Colonel Simpkins murmured something about not feeling well and went out. The Admiral said he supposed he ought to see if the old boy was all right, and went after him. Little Mrs. Simpkins sighed again and said the poor ghost always depressed her, and Mrs. Savernac said she supposed Hamlet must be over age or he'd have been called up. Mrs. Whinebite said, was it real or feigned madness, and stared at us hungrily, each in turn, but nobody felt up to embarking on a discussion with her. At the end, when the curtain came down on a stage strewn with corpses, I had sat so still that I had pins and needles in one foot and a crick in my neck. The Admiral and the Colonel were waiting for us on the steps outside. They both looked cheerful, and I guessed they had been to visit an old school chum who lives near the theater. "I've ordered tea at Treherne's," said Mrs. Whinebite. "She thinks of everything, doesn't she?" said the conductor, who had planned to take Lady B and me to his favorite hotel. At the tea shop, a large table had been prepared for us, as though we were a visiting hockey team, and Mrs. Whinebite, wreathed in smiles, sat herself down beside the teapot like a schoolmistress who was allowed discipline to relax for once. "Poor little Ophelia," said Lady B, passing a plate of thick bread and butter. "The person I'm always so sorry for is Queen Gertrude," I said. "My dear Henrietta," said Mrs. Whinebite, "she was an adulteress, and an incestuous one at that." "Oh dear, I do dislike those sort of words," said little Mrs. Simpkins. "Well, I don't know," I said, carried away by a subject to which I had given much thought. "To begin with, I'm sure she didn't know her husband had been murdered, and then I can't help thinking she must have had rather a dreary life with Hamlet and his father. I mean to say, let's face it, Hamlet was a tiresome boy, though I dare say it was partly her fault for spoiling him. But if I'd heard Bill speaking to an old man like Hamlet spoke to Polonius, I'd have spanked him. And nobody could call Hamlet's father a jolly sort of man, though of course he may have been jollier before he became a ghost. I always think King Claudius must have been good fun. People with red hair often are. Of course he doesn't appear at his best in the play, biting his nails like that, but I expect he had plenty of charm and vitality really, and Gertrude fell for it, and who can blame her?" I paused for breath. Henrietta always likes to put forward an original point of view, said Mrs. Whinebite. Bless her, she added viciously, and I buried my scarlet face in my teacup. Fine play, said Colonel Simpkins. I was only sorry I missed such a lot of it. And he winked at me with the eye furthest from Mrs. Whinebite. Always your affectionate childhood's friend, Henrietta. October 7th, 1942. My dear Robert, we have shut up our dining room and put our dining table in one of those stove things in the drawing room. We consider that by doing this, we have scored a bullseye in the fuel target, or at least an inner. Now I am making a little cozy corner in the linen cupboard so that we shall be able to withdraw to better positions when Gwillem arrives, when Gwillem drives us from an even meager comfort of our stove. What we shall do when he forbids a boiler fire as well, I do not know. Imagination boggles, as they say. There has been a salvage drive going on here in an unused garage for the last fortnight. Charles and I made our big salvage effort several months ago, so our contributions this time have been rather puny, though Charles created a small stir by bringing some enormous tomes of out-of-date surgery, which he left on the pavement outside the salvage authorities, having locked up and gone away to a well-earned lunch. The books were full of unsuitable pictures, and quite a little crowd of evacuees on their way to school gathered round to feast their eyes on them until they were moved on by our policeman, who then began looking at them himself. This afternoon I took down a watering can with a hole in it and found Mrs. Savernac standing in front of one of the dumps looking wistfully at mountains of pots, pans, kettles, and whatnot. I could do with a lot of these things, she said. That sweet little kettle, for instance. It's sure to have a hole in it. But it could be mended, Henrietta, she said eagerly. Look, it's only a tiny hole. And she picked the kettle up but dropped it guiltily when she saw the Admiral and Colonel Simpkins coming in at the garage door. As chairman of the Urban District Council and Special Constable, they feel it is their duty to visit the dump every day. That's a nice watering can, said the Admiral. I brought it, I said proudly. My dear Henrietta, you must be mad, said the Admiral. It's only got one tiny hole, which could easily be mended. That's just how I feel about that little kettle, said Mrs. Savernac, and they both snatched the objects of their desires off the dump and held them up to the light. It was then that Lady B came into the garage, staggering under the weight of an enormous pile of books. We were half hidden from her by the pots and pans, and she tottered over to the paper dump without having seen us. We looked at each other with concern, for Lady B loves her books, and when she gave up her house and moved into her tiny flat, they were the only luxury she allowed herself to take with her. We tiptoed round to the other side of our tin mountain, and there she was, tight-lipped, throwing one precious volume after another onto the paper dump. I saw her beloved Trollops hurtling through the air, followed by the Shaws, and as each old and valued friend landed with a melancholy plop on the sacrificial altar, Lady B muttered, "Damn Hitler." Colonel Simpkins, who was deeply moved by this little scene, surprised us by inviting us all to tea with him at the hotel. Lady B said she must put on her best hat first, and we waited outside her flat while she made the necessary change. As we trooped into the hotel lounge, I heard one of the visitors say, "Who are these people?" "Locals," said her friend. "My dear," said the first visitor, "I'm told they never do a tap and spend the whole day playing bridge." "4 more ARPs called up this month," said the Admiral. "The women will have to come forward." "I thought you used to say that a woman's place was in the home," said Lady B. "So it is in peacetime," said the Admiral. "War's different." "Poor women," I said. "They ought to be proud to come to their country's need," said Colonel Simpkins, looking at me very sternly. "They are," I said, "only they must get rather sick of being mucked about." "What a disgusting expression," said Mrs. Savernac. "What Henrietta means," said Lady B, "is that one day women are going to be told that their place is in the home, and the next minute they have to man the guns. And if they get their legs blown off, it's supposed to matter less to them than it does to a man," I said. "And as soon as they've got used to manning the guns, the war will end and they'll be told their place is in the home again," said Lady B. "Bad luck, of course," said the Admiral, "but war is war." "I wonder how men would like it if they were whipped out of the Navy and Stock Exchange and things of that kind and made to push babies about in prams all day," said Lady B, who was warming to her subject. Of course, I always maintain that a woman's place is not the home, said late Mrs. Savernac. Oh, yes, it is, said Lady B, and most of the nice, sensible women were in homes before the war, and too busy to come out of them, and that's why we have so few women members of Parliament. But upon my word, if the country had been ruled by women for the last 20 years, they couldn't have made a worse mess of it than the men. When peace comes, I really think we'll have to put the men to pram pushing and see what we can do about it. The Admiral mopped his brow. You weren't a suffragette before the last war by any chance, were you? He said. Lady B twinkled at him. We were abroad at the time, she said, but I'd like to have been. She'd have chained herself to the railings, said Colonel Simpkins, looking helplessly at the Admiral. I certainly would, said Lady B. Always your affectionate childhood's friend, Henrietta. November 18th, 1942. My dear Robert, our wine merchant, who was always rather kind to us because he used to play cricket with Charles' father, was kinder than usual this month and sent us an extra bottle of gin. So we asked Faith, who is home on leave, and the conductor to drinks on Saturday night. Lady B came too, and it was quite pre-war and the greatest fun. In the middle, the linnet, who had got a day off, walked in looking so radiant that I knew something must have happened. You'd better tell us straight away, I said, as she stood there smiling and blinking in the light. Who is it? Said Charles sternly. Philip, said the linnet, and there was silence, because nobody could think of an adequate reason why she shouldn't be engaged to Philip, who was very nice. He hasn't asked my consent yet, said Charles, who has confided to me more than once that he was looking forward to throwing his weight about over his daughter's engagement. Sweetie pie, he's coming to see you as soon as he can get some leave, said the linnet soothingly. Mind you, there's to be no question of an engagement until I've interviewed this young man, said Charles pompously. Don't be tiresome, Charles, said Lady B, who loves a romance. Come here, linnet, and let me kiss you. The linnet was folded to that warm and loving bosom, and I stood with the cocktail shaker in my hand, prodding gently at my emotions, as one prods with one's tongue at a tooth which may begin aching any minute. I was pleased and surprised to find that, contrary to all I had been told of a mother's heart on such occasions, mine was like a singing bird and my eyes filled with joyful tears. So that I overfilled the conductor's glass and it all ran down over his legs. Look what you're doing, yelled Charles, and the conductor sucked his knee so that not a drop of the precious fluid should be wasted. You have always said, Robert, that there is only one thing more depressing than a woman talking about her daughter's wedding, and that is a woman talking about her daughter's engagement. So I will lay off the linnet and begin on Faith, who is neither my daughter nor engaged, though of course we all hope she will fix things up with the conductor some day. After all the excitement about the linnet had died down, we found ourselves in a very emotional state, and the conductor fixed Faith with a mournful gaze so full of dog-like devotion that Charles cried, Why in God's name don't you marry the man, Faith, and put him out of his misery? I don't know, said Faith, opening her blue eyes very wide. Well, it's time you did, said Charles crisply. Don't be harsh with her, Charles, said the conductor. He isn't being harsh, cried Faith. He couldn't be. Could you, my angel kiss? And she drew herself into Charles's arms. The conductor winced, and I wondered whether it would ease the situation if I were to throw myself into his arms. I looked at Lady B. The same thought I could see had crossed her mind, but catching my eye, she gave an almost imperceptible shake of the head. The linnet, who was the only person present who could have made this gesture with success, was lost in a happy dream, so the only thing was for Lady B to get up and say it was time to go home. I think the conductor must have been upset, because he left his mackintosh behind. He rang up later to ask if it were there, and we said yes, hanging on the banisters, and after dinner he and Faith came round to fetch it. This isn't my mackintosh, said the conductor. Well, it wasn't ours either. Then Charles said, might it be Lady B's? And I said, no, Lady B's was a gray one. Well, I must say it's all very peculiar, said Faith, looking at us in a meaningful sort of way. I hope you aren't accusing us of stealing the mackintosh, I said. Not stealing exactly, said Faith, but of course, with the linnet getting married, you'd bound to be sort of short of coupons. Well, I'm damned, said Charles, and shut the front door behind them more loudly than was strictly necessary. Later, the conductor ran up to say the coat was his landlady's, which he had brought along by mistake, and his own was at home hanging in the hall. Charles thinks the incident may have drawn them closer together. Always your affectionate childhood's friend, Henrietta. January 13th, 1943. My dear Robert, Charles and I spent a very quiet Christmas without the children. We gave each other a book about Nelson, which we both wanted to read, but our most exciting present was a sort of felt glove for putting coal on the fire. Its underside is black to match the coal, and the top a sprightly green decorated with little felt flowers. Charles and I were delighted with it because ever since our home life became darkened by the fuel target, it has been our frugal custom to put coal on the fire with our fingers. Each time Charles finishes this domestic duty, he rises to his feet with his blackened fingers held stiffly before him, opens the door with his elbow, stumps upstairs to the bathroom, turns on the basin tap with his other elbow, and has a good wash. I, who have not been trained to such aseptic methods, and am not as clean as Charles anyway, and often in more of a hurry, have other ways. Look, Charles, I said, black underneath so as not to show the dirt. It's a lovely present, said Charles, slipping his hand inside. Now you won't have to open the door with your elbow anymore. And you won't have to wipe your fingers on your knickers, Henrietta. They are black knickers, Charles. And I have not forgotten the occasion, went on Charles sternly, when I happened to be standing near and you wiped your fingers on the trousers of my dark blue suit. Charles, this is Christmas Day. Very well, said Charles, we'll say no more about it. It was Christmas afternoon. The fire, thanks to the glove, was blazing merrily. Perry was asleep in his basket, the telephone was mercifully silent, and Charles and I, who had lunched lightly off soup, cheese, and celery, reminded each other with pleasure of our friends who, after turkey and plum pudding, would by now be feeling stodged and flushed. That glove, said Charles after a long silence, ought to hang on a nail. It was the thought I had been keeping at bay for a long time. No housewife likes to be reminded of such things on a Christmas afternoon. Directly she hears the word nail, her mind flies to the toolbox, and she remembers with a twinge of conscience that it needs tidying, and that all the nails are rattling around on the bottom instead of lying neatly in an empty cigar box marked nails, which for some reason is full of picture wire. From this unpleasant thought, her mind leaps to the possibility that there are no nails. Did she not tell the gardener last week that he could take all he wanted to mend the greenhouse door? No gardener has ever been known to return a nail from whence it came, and the housewife feels pretty sure that if there are any nails left, they are on the shelf in the greenhouse with the seed catalogs and the secateurs. How terrible on a cozy Christmas afternoon to have to walk down the garden in the rain to look on the shelf in the greenhouse. Surely there must be one nail left, leading a carefree, rolling life at the bottom of the toolbox? Or perhaps a tin tack? No, the tin tacks were all used up on the blackout in the bathroom. If you aren't going to read that book about Nelson, you might let me have it, said Charles, and I handed it over. It would be so simple to get up from one's chair, go to the toolbox in the scullery, find a nail, take the hammer in hand, and with 3 deft strokes assure for oneself a sense of smugness and well-being for many months to come. But could one be absolutely sure of the hammer being in the toolbox? Was it not Mattins who only yesterday took it for the linoleum in the kitchen? In which case, of course, it would not now be in the kitchen drawer or possibly on the dresser. Charles laid down the book about Nelson. If you will bring me the hammer and a nail, I will do the job, he said generously. If you will bring me the hammer and nail, I'll do the job myself, I said. In the meantime, if you aren't reading that book about Nelson... No man likes to hear his wife talk that way, and Charles looked hurt. I am reading it, he said, and anyway, I don't know where the hammer and nails are kept. At 4 o'clock, Lady B arrived to spend the rest of Christmas Day with us. The telephone woke up and rang for Charles, and I went to put the kettle on for tea, so we left her in front of the fire looking at the Nelson book. When we got back, she said, "What a lovely glove for the coal. I've nailed it up for you." Charles and I stared at her and at the glove hanging so neatly beside the fireplace. "Where did you find the hammer and the nails?" we said. "In your toolbox in the scullery, of course," said Lady B, opening her eyes very wide. "You're wonderful," I said, and I gave her a hug, because she hadn't said that the toolbox wanted tidying, and most women would. Charles produced a box of claret from the cellar, which I am beginning to think is like a widow's curse, and which am beginning to think is like the widow's cruise, and after our frugal meal, we sat and talked. Lady B says she can just bear wearing woolen stockings during the day, but in the evening they rise up and choke her, and she has to go upstairs and change into a pair of silk ones with ladders. Always your affectionate childhood's friend, Henrietta. And we'll hear more from Henrietta next time.